Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Judy. And thank you, Courtney. Thanks to all of you for coming here, for taking an interest. And I'm going to show a lot of images, but I'm going to provide a lot of information. Why don't we get right to it? This is obviously a joint lecture. 3 organizations together are partnering. I'm calling it Wheaton's Many Accomplished Women. I think the actual official name is Women of Wheaton, but regardless, I think you get the idea. We're going to look at a number of women who've really left their mark. So first off, a little bit about me before we get started. So who am I? I moved to Wheaton in 1975. Some of you may have seen this slide before. I grew up on the south side of Wheaton. I went to Whittier, Edison, and Wheaton Central. I've written for the Chicago Tribune since 1993. I often cover Wheaton, and I'm a huge aficionado of Wheaton history. And so I've given other talks about local history. Many have said that journalism is the first draft of history. And so I'd like to think that my journalistic work over the years, that's helped me spur some of my interest in local history. So why give this talk? So Wheaton has produced a huge number of very distinguished women, far more than we can cover in this talk. And historically, I feel like over the years, they've gotten short shrift when people discuss the most famous individuals from Wheaton. So who are the famous names that are usually mentioned? You can actually see the list up there on the screen. You usually hear John and Jim Belushi, right? Billy Graham, Kent Graham, they're not related, but Kent Graham was a great athlete. Red Grange, Edwin Hubble, Chuck Long, Robert R. McCormick, Grody Reber, Kenneth Taylor, and Bob Woodward. You can easily think of others beyond the ones I've listed here. So no disrespect to anyone on this above list, but what do all of these people have in common? They're not women. That's exactly right. They're all men. So it's appropriate for us to try to be a little more equitable here. Also, it's Women's History Month. And so this is a great opportunity to delve deeply in, both to the far, far distant past, but also to the more recent past and the present day as well. So that's the origin and the genesis of this talk. What's the one thing I'd like you to take away more than anything else from this talk? Wheaton has been blessed to have produced an incredibly diverse set of women who've distinguished themselves in numerous different fields on the local, national, and even international level. Fields include government, entertainment, sports, and education. Some of what I'll share may be well known to some of you, but some I suspect isn't. But no matter what, I hope what I'm about to share is illuminating and entertaining. So let's get started. Wheaton's first women were the Native Americans. So little is known about specific Native American women who resided here with their families. What you had really were oral traditions, and you didn't have much in the way of written traditions. I found this blurb from the April 1891 Wheaton Illinoisan. They wrote, quote, "Just take a stroll to the northern part of town some fine day and look at new residences which dot the former camping grounds of the Indians." So 1830s were when white settlers came to the Wheaton area from the east. So early white female settlers were Matilda Hooper Butterfield. She was the wife of Lyman Butterfield of Butterfield Road fame. And then Susan Vallette Gary. She was the wife of Erastus Gary and the mother of Judge Albert Gary, who founded U.S. Steel. Susan Vallette married Erastus Gary in 1841. To give you some idea of what the Garys were like around the house, I'm going to read this quote here. "Neither Erastus nor Susan Gary ever wavered in giving a full measure of strength to the severe social, moral, and religious creed which they learned in New England, and of the soundness and rightness of which neither throughout their lives had any doubt." So they sound like some pretty stiff upper-lipped folks, maybe not the kind of people who watch a lot of TV sitcoms necessarily. So then there was the Wheaton family as well, and in particular, Orinda Gary Wheaton. She was part of both the Gary family and the Wheaton family. She was Erastus Gary's sister, and she married Jesse Wheaton. She was in the room in the 1840s when town pioneers, Jesse and Warren Wheaton, and her brother, Erastus Gary, they met at Jesse Wheaton's home. I think you probably all know where that is, on Roosevelt Road. It's now 310 West Evergreen, for dinner with 2 officials from the Galena and Chicago Union Railroad. Orinda prepared the dinner, and the gathering was a success. The railroad was persuaded to lay the route of its tracks to the south from the route that they'd previously intended, so it would go through the center of what's now downtown Wheaton. That made their properties that much more valuable and enabled Wheaton to develop the way it developed. So the tracks wended their way through the family's farmland. Well, this was a seminal moment in the development of Wheaton. Let's be clear, it would be several more decades before we would see women in Wheaton's history known for activities other than meal preparation. So we're going to start with Elsie Storrs Dow. Have any of you heard of Elsie? So she was a Wheaton College graduate and a Wheaton College professor. This is a picture of her here. You'll see she was born in 1859. She actually entered Wheaton College in 1877, graduated in 1881 after taking the classical program. That was a course path normally pursued by men only at that time. She later earned a master's degree from Wheaton. She taught in several other locations before being a principal in Minnesota. She returned to Wheaton College in 1889, so 8 years after she got her undergraduate degree, and she chaired the English department for 46 years. In addition to English literature, she taught history, classics, and math. Professors had to wear numerous hats in those days, and she certainly did. She was an expert on Shakespeare and Browning. She retired in 1942. Fun fact, she lived at 527 Kenilworth Street. Does anyone know what's there now? It's the Wheaton College Gymnasium, or I'm sorry, it's the Anderson Commons. There's nothing on the north side of Kenilworth in that spot. Moving on, I want to stay with educators. This is Katharine Adams Wells. Some of you have probably heard of her. She was Wheaton's first librarian. She had also a fairly stoic look on her face as well. She was the daughter of John Quincy Adams, who was a distant relation of the former president. So by 1890, Wheaton was small, but it was growing. It had 1,600 residents. It needed a library. So money was gathered and contributed and endowed by John Quincy Adams. He co-founded the Chicago Board of Trade. Again, he was distantly related to the president. He was a fourth cousin twice removed. I'm going to guess most of you don't know who your fourth cousins are, much less fourth cousins twice removed. But he dedicated this building, which you know to this day. It's the DuPage Historical Society. He dedicated that in memory of his late wife, Marilla. So they lived right across the street. Their house was where Adams Park is now. And John Quincy Adams had his daughter, Katharine. She helped oversee the assembling of the books for Wheaton's first library. She then became the library's first librarian. So she didn't die until 1942. That was 51 years later. At that time, she called for, in her will, the house to be demolished so the block could be turned into Adams Park. And then she also left $50,000 to Wheaton's library. In 1942, that was no small sum. A new library, the one we're in right now, was then built in 1964. What happened to the Adams Memorial Library? Well, this woman can tell you a little bit about that. The late Margaret Adams Dunton, here, she was born in 1897. Some of you may remember her in this room. I suspect some of you do. She was a teacher, originally a public school teacher. She taught in Cloverdale, remember Cloverdale? Bartlett, Elmhurst, and Villa Park. But later on, she took an interest in local history. She was the president of the Historical Society from 1962 until 1969. And Margaret thought, hey, if this library building is being vacated, could we turn this into a county historical museum? Now, she had some clout. She was married to her husband, Harold. He'd been an assistant township supervisor, and he was on the county board. And sure enough, Margaret Adams Dunton, not only did she make this happen, she then, in 1967, when the museum opened across the street from here, or kitty corner from where we are now, she served in that role for the next 12 years. What that means is she worked full-time as the museum's full-time curator till she was 82 years old. She lived for decades at 610 North Scott Street. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about her because she was both a teacher and a historian. I want to continue talking about educators. I'm going to move forward here a bit. But before I do, I want to take a pause to say, how come this lecture is profiling so few women born in the 19th century? Most of the rest of this talk is going to focus on women born after 1900. So why were there so few names of achievement born before 1900? Well, you can probably guess. Women were second-class citizens for the entire 19th century, for much of the 20th century. Women didn't win the right to vote until 1920. You didn't have a woman elected to the United States Senate until 1932. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, that wasn't passed until 1964. However, we are going to move into the 20th century and eventually the 21st. So we're going to start with Helen Phaon Branch. Do any of you remember her? So women far too numerous to mention here, have taught in Wheaton's public school system for generations. She's believed to have been the first African-American teacher to teach in a public school in DuPage County. Now think about that. She came here in 1963. She was hired at Lincoln Elementary School. She was from Chicago's South Side. She then taught at Lowell and Holmes and the old Wheaton-Warrenville High School. She also taught at Madison School. So she really moved around the district. She was a librarian there before she retired in 1995. She and her husband lived on Hill Avenue, and then they lived in the Streams for 2 decades before they moved to Briar Club. Next up, I'd like to talk about Glenette Tilly Turner. So, for those of you who don't know who Glenette is, Glenette, would you raise your hand, please? All right, so Glenette is a real treasure here. So I was talking about a combination historian and educator, and that's exactly what Glenette has been as well. So she taught second grade in the Wheaton public schools for 20 years, from 1968 until 1988, but she's gone on to have a very successful second career as a historian and as a much honored author and writer. So Glenette is an expert on the Underground Railroad and on black history in Wheaton and in DuPage County, among other subjects. Going back to the 1980s, she wrote regular features for Black Child Journal, for Ebony Junior magazine. She's written numerous books for both adults and children, including the 200-page 1999 book, The Underground Railroad in Illinois. It is really the definitive work on the Underground Railroad in this state. She's also written books for younger readers that, if you know young people in your life, you might want to share. Follow in their footsteps, biographies of 10 outstanding African Americans, and Take a Walk in Their Shoes, biographies of 14 outstanding African Americans. Throughout Glenette's research, she had concluded that Wheaton College was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and that belief then was corroborated in 2009 when a Wheaton College professor, he uncovered an 1889 history of a regiment of the Illinois Volunteer Infantry, and a black soldier, Ezra Cook, had written that the college had kept runaway slaves safe in Blanchard Hall. Glenette has said, in fact, the runaway slaves were able to move about freely without worry of being arrested throughout Blanchard Hall. That was the corroboration needed that really was able to help confirm what Glenette had previously concluded. Now, Glenette has said that her work in documenting what she has learned about the Underground Railroad is, quote, so future generations will have a resource on a very noble part of Illinois history. So much honored, Glenette was appointed advisor to the National Park Service to help educate their staff on the location and preservation of Underground Railroad sites. She also just wrote the Wheaton chapter for the book DuPage Roots, which was just republished by the DuPage Historical Society in a new edition. Its first edition was published in 1985. Glenette was honored with the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award in 2001 and with the National Park Service Underground Railroad Network to Freedom's highest honor. And in April, this is some exciting news, she'll be presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Illinois State Historical Society. So congratulations. So feel free to stop and speak with Glenette later if she'll have you, but here's a photograph of her as well. So moving on, I was saying we were going to continue talking about educators. We are. Next up, I want to talk about Larisha Hawkins. She was, do any of you remember who Larisha Hawkins was? Many of you? She was an Oklahoma native, and she earned degrees in political science from Rice University in Houston. She joined Wheaton College's faculty in 2007. She was very popular with students, and she was awarded tenure from the college in 2013. That made her the first black female professor ever to gain tenure from Wheaton College. In 2015, she sparked a major controversy when she posted a photograph of herself on Facebook wearing a hijab, or a headscarf, in what she characterized as solidarity with her Muslim brothers and sisters. She'd consulted with an Islamic group in doing so. She's a Christian, but she had consulted with an Islamic group to make sure what she was doing was not culturally inappropriate. Wheaton College is, of course, an evangelical Christian college, despite the fact that some Christian women wore head coverings in the Bible. Some other Wheaton faculty had been pictured wearing headscarves in the past. The college placed her on administrative leave as it investigated. So this removal quickly divided the campus. So the college issued a statement that, quote, while Islam and Christianity are both monotheistic, we believe there are fundamental differences between the two faiths, including what they teach about God's revelation to humanity, the nature of God, the path to salvation, and the life of prayer. And the college claimed to be demanding theological responses to some of her statements. Now, a lot of Wheaton students and a lot of Christian clergy members and Wheaton professors as well rallied to Hawkins' side. Some student demonstrators demanded her reinstatement. She explained that she was trying to show solidarity with the group that had been under attack amid mass shootings in Paris and in San Bernardino, California. You may remember that. She told the Chicago Tribune, quote, I think Wheaton takes very seriously its role as a Christian liberal arts institution, and I respect the institution. Several weeks later, though, the two sides were at a stalemate. The college proposed revoking her tenure, while she was committed, at least initially, to fighting to retain her tenure. So meanwhile, some very wealthy college alumni were pressuring the college's president to find a way to remove her from the college permanently. So in January 2016, the college put together a bill of particulars, a process leading to termination, presenting her with a 40-page set of charges against her and recommending that she resign. They also started a process by which she would appear before 9 tenured faculty members, who then would make a recommendation to the college's president, who then would bring his recommendation to the college's board of trustees. You see who's really in charge here. So Hawkins was unbowed. She said, quote, "Wheaton College cannot scare me into walking away from the truth that all humans, Muslims, the vulnerable, the oppressed, are all my brothers and sisters, and I'm called by Jesus to walk with them," she told an ecumenical group of clergy in Chicago in January of 2016. Things came to a head the following month in February of 2016 when the college's faculty council concluded that racism, at least in part, was behind the college administration's treatment of Larisha Hawkins. The two sides reached a settlement, however, just a few weeks later. She did agree to leave her employment from the college. The college agreed to create an endowed scholarship for interns in her name, and then Provost Stan Jones publicly apologized for acting in haste in suspending her. So he said he'd asked her for her forgiveness for the ways he contributed to the fracture of their relationship and to the fracture of her relationship with the college. The college's president then stated that, quote, "The college hoped to, quote, become a better, stronger community, the shared understanding of academic freedom in the context of Christian convictions." So Larisha Hawkins expressed no regret in starting this controversy, but she acknowledged at a news conference in Chicago the journey had been a difficult one. She said, "Today is Lent, the beginning of a season of fasting, a season to reflect where we are on our spiritual journeys, who we are and what we are becoming," she said. "So I ask you, who are you? Do you find yourself in your neighbor? Because yes, we are all created in the image of the divine, but we find ourselves in our neighbors and we find ourselves in other people." Shortly after leaving the college, she took a position at the University of Virginia. That's where she teaches political science classes to this day. She was the subject of a 2018 documentary titled "Same God" that was made by a Wheaton College alumna. If you look here, this is a photo of Larisha on the left at that press conference in February of 2016. Wheaton College's president is at the far right. And then to the right, there's a photo of Larisha Hawkins as well with Julie Rogers, another former Wheaton College employee. She was a resource for the LGBT-leaning students at the college, and a young friend is pictured with them as well. Next up, I want to shift to the political realm, and it is true, several years ago I did do a talk about former Mayor Margie Hamilton. She lived to be 104 years old. She was Wheaton's first female mayor. She was elected mayor way back in 1969. She actually first became involved in local government in another town, however. She became involved, she and her husband were living in Barrington at the time. This was during World War II. She objected to a decision by Barrington officials to bar Japanese American youngsters from using the local swimming pool because their parents' properties had been confiscated. She said, quote, "I just became infuriated at that because they were the same age as some of my kids, and they were darling children. I protested, and much to my amazement, I won. The Barrington district had to change. Because of my action, they let the children back into the swimming pool. That is the incident that started my interest in politics." So she moved to Wheaton in 1950, and then she started Wheaton's chapter of the League of Women Voters in 1955. She ran for and won election in 1959 to be a city commissioner. That made her the first woman ever on Wheaton's city council. And while in the council, she pushed for a council manager form of government, which would involve having a professional city manager. That is a form of government that has worked out very well for Wheaton these many years since then. I can attest to that, as we have the current city manager in attendance tonight, and he's done an outstanding job, as did his predecessor. Margie also sought to preserve the old Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin right-of-way, now the Prairie Path. She also pushed for a new public library and for the city's acquisition of the old insurance company building, which is now City Hall. She was most known, however, for supporting a fair housing ordinance which barred discrimination in home purchases. The measure passed the city council in 1967 in a 4-to-1 vote. It made Wheaton the first community in Illinois to pass such a law. Wheaton was the only community in DuPage at the time with a population that was more than 1% black. I interviewed Margie in 2014 when she was 99 years old, and she told me, "My husband and I both said that if we were ever in a position to change that, that's the first thing I'd do." There was a special election in 1969 when Wheaton's previous mayor had to move out of town. She was elected mayor in a special election. This is a photograph I just love. It's kind of grainy, but I love it. This is her with Tom Shannon, the gentleman who developed Farnham and the Streams, and that's the two of them in front of a gigantic cake commemorating the approval of the Streams. I don't know how they got through that cake. I'm guessing that some of that cake ended up in the trash, but it is. I love this picture of her there with him. And then when she was mayor, she presided over the redevelopment of the Aurora and Elgin's rail yards into what's now known as Wheaton Center. As I just mentioned, the Streams, she also oversaw some of the development approvals for the Streams on the west side of town. She chose not to run for re-election in 1971, and she later formed the county's first chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. She also later led the Older Adult Institute at College of DuPage. She retired from COD when she was 93 years old in 2008. I love these pictures here. This one on the left is her when she was mayor. This one is, I think, property of the Chicago Tribune, so don't tell them that I borrowed it for this talk. The one on the right is actually her when she was working over at College of DuPage. So I just think these are marvelous, marvelous photos of her. All right, so I'm going to move on into the entertainment realm now. Have any of you ever heard of The King and I? Probably most of you, right, or almost everyone. So amazingly, the origin story behind The King and I comes from Wheaton. Some of you may know this. This is Margaret Landon. She lived to be 90 years old. She's a Wheaton College alum. The story that triggered the musical and two films, one had Rex Harrison and Irene Dunn in it, and I'm sure the one you know with Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr in it, that was written by Margaret Landon. She was a 1925 alumna of Wheaton College, and when she was living in Wheaton, she was back after having been a missionary from 1937 through 1939. She wrote the book that was based on. The book was published in 1944, and it became a bestseller. So the way it started is after college, she and her husband went to Thailand, where they were missionaries, and it was there that she learned about an Indian-born widowed English woman who was the governess to the family of the King of Thailand. She was also fascinated by another woman who had lived and worked in Thailand, and she originally sought to write a book about that woman, Edna Cole, but she couldn't find enough primary material, so she decided to go back and write about the Indian-born widowed English woman who is the king's governess of his family. So the result was what you see here, the best-selling novel Anna and the King of Siam, which is a semi-fictionalized biographical novel. Again, as I said, it was published in 1944. She wrote most of the book in Wheaton in the late 1930s. So have any of you seen the Irene Dunn and Rex Harrison movie? Any of you? Okay. And then if any of you, so then it was a source material for Rodgers and Hammerstein's Tony Award-winning Broadway musical, The King and I, with Yul Brynner again and Gertrude Lawrence. And then Yul Brynner reprised his role in the 1956 film version. I'm guessing many of you have seen that. So much later, I find this mildly amusing. She was listed as the writer of a 1972 CBS non-musical sitcom called Anna and the King, based on her book. However, she filed a lawsuit over the portrayals of the characters. She thought it was frivolous and inappropriate, and the suit eventually was settled. Not that she needed any more money, but I'm guessing she got some more money out of CBS for that. She is buried in Wheaton Cemetery. I'm going to show you a couple more photos of her here. This is her here as a younger woman, and then this is her here with her husband and her children. All right, so I'm going to move forward to the rock and roll era. Do any of you know who the rock band, the B-52s, are? Yeah. So amazingly, Kate Pearson, one of the front women in the B-52s, has a tie to Wheaton. So if you know anything about the B-52s, you know that the women in the band have these incredible beehive bouffant hairstyles. But they're a lot of fun. So you see them on the right there. That's their smash 1989 album, Cosmic Thing. So she's an unexpected Wheaton notable. So she's a singer, a guitarist, a bassist, and a keyboard player. So the band was formed in Athens, Georgia in 1978. They're described alternately as being a new wave style party band, but they're also described as having a thrift shop aesthetic in terms of the kind of clothing that they wear. Their many hits have included Rock Lobster, Private Idaho, Love Shack, and Rome. So now you might say, well, wait, she's from Wheaton? Well, no, not exactly. She grew up in Rutherford, New Jersey. However, she did attend Wheaton College during 2 school years, 1966-67 and 67-68. She lived in Evans Hall, also known as McManus Evans Hall. And if you look here, I pulled these from the Wheaton College student directory from 66 and 67 and 67, 68. By golly, there she is, Katharine E. Pearson from Rutherford, New Jersey. So she transferred to Boston University in 1968. She earned a journalism degree. She then went to Europe, went back to Boston, and then went down to Athens, Georgia. A friend of hers was offered a job there. Athens was a major college town. She met up with a very arty crowd. She could play the guitar. So in 1976, she got together with 3 locals from Athens and another expatriate like her from New Jersey, Fred Schneider, and they formed the band, initially as something of a gag. But incredibly, they took off. They started playing shows around Athens, and then eventually they went up to New York City. They played a gig, and all of a sudden they attracted a following. So they soon had a huge hit with the song Rock Lobster. Does anyone know the song? And then after that, the song Private Idaho, and soon they became one of the world's top live acts, including appearing on Saturday Night Live. One of the band members, he died of AIDS in 1985, and the band went through a lull before rebounding even bigger in the late 1980s with the release of that album cover I showed you, Cosmic Thing. They made another Saturday Night Live appearance, and then they went on major tours. Everyone must know the song Love Shack, isn't that right? Everybody knows Love Shack. So these are some pictures of Kate Pearson. These are screen grabs from their rehearsal on Saturday Night Live on Earth Day in 1990. So you see these rehearsals were done. She actually has curlers in her hair during the rehearsal in anticipation of that evening's performance. I did mention that I should just say the guitarist there is actually a backing guitarist. She's not one of the front women in the band. Ditto for the drummer as well. So she also famously did a duet with another band from Athens, Georgia, REM. You probably know the song Shiny Happy People. Today the B-52s still perform, but they don't tour. They're all in their 70s. So they do perform concert residencies, however. Kate Pearson and her wife, Monica Coleman, they married in 2015. They live in Woodstock, New York now, and they run several lodging sites that anyone can stay at. One is 20 minutes from their home, and another one is in California. Interestingly, Kate Pearson never has spoken in interviews about her experience at Wheaton College. For this lecture, I tried to get in touch with her, and I will tell you, I was not successful. So here's a picture of her lounging with her wife, Monica Coleman, in Woodstock, New York. That's quite a garden that they have, I'd say. All right, so moving on, I want to stay in entertainment, but move into the acting realm. I bring up next what is easily the most famous female acting person to come from Wheaton, and that's Gail O'Grady. I'm going to guess most everyone in this room knows who Gail O'Grady is. So she grew up in Wheaton. She went to Wheaton North High School, and yet while she was at Wheaton North High School, she famously did not win a spot in a school play. You all know that success is the best revenge, and since Gail moved out to Los Angeles in 1986, she certainly has had great acting success. So she appeared in some made-for-TV films initially, and then she was cast on the NBC drama NYPD Blue as the gum-cracking, big-haired squad secretary, Donna Abandonando. I practiced this so many times and I still didn't get it right. I was more stressed out about that than any other part of this talk. Abandondo. All right. So she then was a series regular on the TV drama American Dreams in the early 2000s, and she's appeared on numerous other series since, including most recently Criminal Minds. Take a look at that photo there. Does that not just scream the Gail O'Grady that you all know from NYPD Blue days? So although she's appeared in numerous feature films as well, she really prefers TV. She has said, quote, "I really like working in television because you work so long and closely with the rest of the cast that you become like family." She said this to the Daily Herald in 2010, and she said, and I don't think anyone would disagree with this, and there are better roles available now on television than anywhere else, including film. That is absolutely right. One of my favorite things to point out is that a fun trivia fact, when she was starting out, she made a Diet Pepsi commercial in 1987 with actor Michael J. Fox. It is, in my view, one of the great TV commercials of the 1980s. Here are some stills from the commercial. Do any of you remember this commercial? It's fabulous. So she comes to the door. Michael J. Fox just has come home. She's a new neighbor across the hall. She rings the bell and wonders if he has any Diet Pepsi. He goes and he checks. You can see there he looks in his fridge and his 2 liter is empty. So he says, I'll be right back. He goes out the window on the fire escape, goes out in a pouring rain, runs across the street to a soda machine. There are a whole bunch of tough gangbangers standing around the soda machine. Michael J. Fox, as you know, he's a diminutive individual, but he marches up with a lot of swagger up to them. He grabs a Diet Pepsi. She then says, if it's okay, if you don't have a Diet Pepsi, I can leave. And he says, no, I got it. And so he ends up coming back up the fire escape eventually. His window closes on him, so he smashes through the window so he can give his new neighbor the Diet Pepsi. And then she says something to the effect of, well, do you have another one for my roommate, Randy? Randy. And he goes, I think it's not Randy. He goes, Randy. And then, of course, Randy ends up being a woman and not a man. And then you see him freeze for a moment. He's all wet, and realizing he's going to have to go out down the fire escape again, actually. So it is, like I said, one of the great TV commercials of the 1980s. Another terrific acting talent from Wheaton, who's probably lesser known only because she's younger, is Sonal Shah. Do any of you know Sonal Shah? So she actually, she's in her early 40s. She went to Wheaton Warrenville South High School. She grew up in Donata North, so she's a product of District 200 schools. She is one of the first Indian Americans to have a regular starring role on a major network show. She portrayed a doctor on NBC's comedy Scrubs in 2009. Now, I talked to Sonal for this talk. I called her up out in Los Angeles. We had a nice chat. I initially was going to claim that she was the first Indian American to have a regular starring role. She said she didn't feel comfortable making that claim, and that's probably right. There probably were, there have been a lot of TV shows before 2009. In 1998, when she was finishing up high school, she was crowned the DuPage County Fair Queen. She told the Daily Herald at that time, quote, I am very, very surprised. I'm probably the only Indian girl who's had an opportunity like this. After high school, she went to Loyola University. She acted locally in the Chicago area, and then she moved to Los Angeles in 2006. Sonal's recent work, she's done a Netflix movie called Definition Please. She did a movie on AMC Plus and some other streaming platforms called The Four Samosas. And she actually has a development deal with an actor, a Naperville native, an Indian American actor, Parvesh Cheena, to create an animated show for Disney. And she's done some voice acting work as well for animated productions, including the Disney Junior show Mira, Royal Detective. She told me, quote, I'm proud to be from Wheaton. I had a really lovely childhood in Wheaton. The only reason I came to LA is the industry. My parents are still in Wheaton, and I moved back for a year during the pandemic. So this is Sonal Shah here at the South Asian Film Festival in Chicago, and that's a screen grab of her from TV's Scrubs in 2009. So now I'd like to shift gears quickly into the athletic arena. I'd like to start with Wheaton's first Olympian, Margaret Abbott. She was a part of Chicago Golf Club's community in the 1890s, and she was the first American woman ever to win an Olympic event. She won the women's golf tournament at the 1900 Summer Olympics in Paris. So there were a lot of newspaper renderings of people in that era, and so I grabbed one of those. That one is an actual picture of her, but in a few moments you'll see another picture of her that I'm very proud to display publicly. Before I do that, let me give you the backstory. So Margaret Abbott was born in 1878. She lost her father at a young age, so she moved with her widowed mother and her siblings to Chicago in 1884. Her mother, Mary Abbott, was a writer and golfer of some renown, and her mother really knew how to occupy high society. So her mother actually, interestingly, became a member of Chicago Golf, along with 5 other women in 1897. Now, both Mary and Margaret got to know the Chicago Golf Club's co-founder, Charles Blair McDonald. He was a huge champion of their efforts and their golfing. He even played in a mixed foursomes event with Margaret in Chicago in 1897. So in 1899, both Abbotts traveled to Paris, and then they stayed. While they were there, completely coincidentally, the 1900 Summer Olympics happened. The 1900 Olympic Games were the first ones to include women, but interestingly enough, it overlapped with the 1900 Paris Exposition. Numerous events at those Olympics were considered demonstration sports, so many athletes didn't even realize they were formally competing in the Olympics. And incredibly, Margaret Abbott, she was 22 years old. She won the 9-hole tournament. It was at a course 50 miles north of Paris. She shot a score of 47. Her mother, Mary, came in 7th, tied for 7th with a score of 65. It was the only time that a mother and daughter have ever competed against one another in the Olympics. But here's where it gets really crazy. Margaret Abbott died in 1955 not having realized that the competition she was in was technically the Olympics. She didn't realize that she was the first American woman ever to win an Olympic event. The event wasn't certified until after her death. She also wasn't given a medal. They didn't start handing them out until 1904. So I'm going to go back to her victory. Among those who were there for her victory, Marshall Field Jr. No surprise, she and the mother and daughter were very active parts of Chicago's social scene. Outside of golf, she had other talents too. Margaret Abbott was an illustrator and an inventor of children's games. After Paris, she married the noted writer and also Chicago Golf Club member Finley Peter Dunn. They moved from Chicago to New York and eventually to Connecticut and had a family. She played golf some, but no longer in tournaments. And again, incredibly, she had no idea that she had been an Olympian. Back then, there just wasn't the information that there is today. You didn't have the internet. Things traveled very slowly. By the 1950s, 1900 must have felt like an ancient memory to her. So she stayed in Wheaton some of the time during the summers of 1897 through 1899. While in Chicago, she lived in the Marquette building on Rush Street. That would be generally during the winters. And again, more renderings from the local newspapers. The rendering on the right, actually, you can see on the walls of the Chicago Golf Club if you ever go over to their clubhouse. Below is a photo of her taken at the Chicago Golf Club sometime in the late 1890s. Now, I'm not going to make you strain your eyes here. So if you move in closely, this is that same photo. And if you see blown up there, that is Margaret Abbott. She would be about 20 years old at the time of this undated photo, sometime in the late 1890s. Thanks to Chicago Golf Club's historian, John Moran, for helping me identify her and allowing us to use this photograph. It's very generous of him. Next up, I'd like to speak about Nancy Swider Peltz Sr. Do any of you know who Nancy Swider Peltz Sr. is? So she is a product of Wheaton College and lives in Wheaton. She is a world-class speed skater who competed in 4 different Olympic Games, 76, 80, 84, and 88. She grew up in Park Ridge. She graduated from Wheaton College. She lives here to this day, and she's now a speed skating coach. In addition to being a speed skater, she also was a 5-time All-American swimmer. Her senior year at Wheaton College, she set records at the college and among Illinois small colleges in the 100 and 200-yard breaststrokes. This is not a hack. This is somebody who is really good at athletics and really just an incredible athlete. Now she's been coaching other speed skaters for 30-plus years. There are so many things that stand out about Nancy. She has many athletic firsts. She has a family that's very athletic. She's collaborated with her daughter specifically, who has the same name, and her coaching as well. But first, I want to talk about her career. So she started speed skating when she was 13 years old. She made her first Olympic team 6 years later at the age of 19. She was the first woman in American history to compete in 4 different Olympic Games. She's a fierce competitor, and she also set 2 world records. She was inducted into the U.S. Speed Skating Hall of Fame. So she finished 7th in the 3,000-meter race at the 1976 Olympic Games in Innsbruck, and shortly after the Olympics, she broke her first world record in that race by 4 seconds. She then was an alternate in the 1980 Olympics, and that year she set her second world record in the 10,000-meter race. She retired after the 1980 Olympics to finish her education, but that competitive urge is strong, and she unretired in 1984, and she went to Sarajevo, where she finished 10th in the 3,000-meter race. Once again, she retired. She gave birth to her daughter in 1987. After her daughter was born, she really got back into fitness. She started bicycling and swimming. Soon enough, the new mom decided to train yet again for the next Olympics in 1988, and what do you know? She qualified yet again. She participated in 4 more Olympic trials, 92, 94, 98, and 2002. That's 8 Olympic trials in 4 decades. In 1992, at age 34, she missed the team by just 1 spot. She was 5 years older than the only other 30 seniority-ish contender for the U.S. team. She was more than twice the age of at least one potential rival on the U.S. team. Her family is just about the most athletic family you'll find. Her husband, Jeff, is a longtime assistant football coach at Wheaton College. Her brother, Mike, was formerly the college's head football coach. Her children also are speed skaters. Her son, Jeffrey, played football at Wheaton. He competed in the 2006 Olympic speed skating trials, and he qualified to skate in the 2018 Olympics before there was a reversal due to some political elements that probably aren't worth going into here. Her daughter, Nancy Swider-Pelt Jr., has had a fine career in her own right as a speed skater. Mother and daughter, ages 45 and 14, competed against one another in the first race of the 2002 Olympic trials, and the daughter beat the mother, actually. So Nancy Jr. also competed in the 2010 Olympics. So this is a picture of Nancy and Nancy, you'll see there. So she's been a speed skating coach now for several decades. Among those she's coached is Brian Hansen. He won a silver medal in the team pursuit in the 2010 Olympics. Nancy Swider-Pelt told the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in a 2013 article, quote, "I don't coach in the conventional way. I'm what you call an experiential coach. I coach with feeling. I watch my skaters. I started out my career by actually skating with them. I would feel what they felt. Most coaches come up with an idea and make their athletes do it. I'm a person who wants to understand what they're feeling." She also said, "I wasn't coaching with the intention of making it a career. I didn't do it because they wanted me or needed me. I just thought I ought to do it." So this is her here with her son, Jeff, as well. This is her two children, Nancy Jr. and Jeff, and this, obviously, Nancy Sr. there in the middle. So finally, I'm going to talk about Katie Meyer. Does anyone remember Katie Meyer from Wheaton High School athletic days? So Katie Meyer grew up on Wheaton's South Side. She went to Whittier, Edison, and Wheaton Central. She was a star women's basketball player at Duke University, and she's now a very successful women's basketball coach. She has been the head women's basketball coach of the University of Miami in Florida since 2005. So I'd like to start out by talking about her athletic prowess at a young age. I'm going to start out, she was the youngest of four. She was born just months after her father, former DePaul University basketball player Jerry Meyer, was killed in a plane crash in August 1967. 2 years later, her mother, who again had 4 children, met and married Howard Skolak, a widower who had 2 sons and 2 daughters of his own. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Very similar to the Brady Bunch, right? Except one more child on each side. So growing up, she was known as Kate in those days. She played basketball in Little League, including plenty of pickup games in her family's driveway on Elm Street. By high school, she was a 3-sport star. She was a standout in volleyball. She was all-conference her junior and senior years. She was a standout in basketball. She was a 3-year starter. One publication named her one of the top 50 basketball players in the nation. She led the team to 2nd place at the state tournament. And then she was a standout in softball. She hit .496. That's a terrific batting average her senior year, and she led the Tigers to the state quarterfinals. She was named the Chicago Tribune's 1985 Athlete of the Year, and she won a full ride to Duke University, where she played basketball. Before we get to Duke, I'll pull out some photographs from her 1985 yearbook. You'll see her there. She was named most athletic, not surprisingly, and that's her volleyball team photograph there as well. Sarah Kidder is shown in front of her. She now is the volleyball coach at Edison Middle School, where she teaches, interestingly enough. So at Duke, Katie Meyer was named her conference's Rookie of the Year, and then after some injury setbacks, she tore her ACL her junior year. She bounced back her senior year. She's in the top 10 in Duke's all-time scoring list for women's basketball. She played professionally in Belgium for 3 years before she returned to the States, and she worked for 8 years as an assistant coach at 2 major universities. Then she spent 4 years at the University of Charlotte's head women's basketball coach. She posted a .628 win-loss percentage. She made 1 NCAA tournament appearance and 2 WNIT appearances. Since 2005, she's found similar success as the head coach at the University of Miami. She has made 9 NCAA tournament appearances and 3 WNIT appearances. She has a .606 win-loss percentage. These are really good win-loss percentages for head coaches. These are the kind of win-loss percentages that allow you to keep your job. So if you have a .428 win-loss percentage, they're probably going to be looking for a new head coach. So Katie has been very successful as a coach. Of her upbringing, she told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel in 2015, I hope she wouldn't mind me saying this here, that her family is, quote, the Brady Bunch masquerading as the Beverly Hillbillies. We love each other and we just show up. In a nutshell, that's us. Katie Meyer married her wife, former Miami TV personality Hunter Reno. She is the niece of former U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno. She married Hunter Reno in 2022. That's a picture of them there when back visiting Chicago. So I'm going to wrap up here. To sum up, I'd like to just really try to encapsulate some of what we've discussed here. Women associated with Wheaton clearly have had impressive achievements on a local, regional, and national level. I've highlighted here just some of the most prominent women who have hailed from Wheaton, but there absolutely have been many other women in numerous fields who've also distinguished themselves. I hope this lecture helps to shape a more balanced narrative when people discuss the personalities behind Wheaton's history, one that includes not just men, but women as well, and in equal measure. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. I'd like to open this up to questions. If you're wondering who you see here, this is Lynette Tilly Turner, Sonal Shah doing some of that voice acting work I've talked about. That's Kate Pearson in the Shiny Happy People video. And then far off to the right is Gail O'Grady. Thank you all.